What's up, and welcome to My Matters. My name's Ethan,
I'm Ben.
I'm Kabir.
and today we are recording our 18th episode. Ben, do you want to go ahead and introduce the topic?
Yeah, so today's episode is about testing. Probably something all of you have experienced, whether you're a parent or a student. Students have struggled with test taking. I know I definitely have. I'm sure Ethan and Kabir you have as well. But we're recording this episode today for two reasons. One, we haven't recorded an episode with just us three in a while, and we're going to have a lot of guest episodes coming up. So today we're kind of talking about testing, which is something we've all experienced, and we'll share our experience and some strategies in this kind of short episode, and we hope you can relate to and find some helpful tips. And the other reason is that it's the beginning of the school year. Testing is coming around for people who starting high school. They're experiencing their first high school test. Maybe some disappointment, maybe some excitement, whatever it is. We're here to relate to you and try and provide some helpful tips. So before we start, I kind of want to ask in a, in a question that seems very simple, but could all be a little bit complicated. And what does a test mean? What makes a test stressful? What makes a test anxiety provoking? What is a test? Is a assignment you take home and you turn in for a grade? Is that a test? Like, what is a test? Ethan, Kabir, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I see tests as mainly something where, you learn all this material, and then you finally have to show that you know it. And I think that can be little quizzes, can be big end of unit tests, even finals, right? But I think the reason why it's so stressful for a lot of students is because you can know the material, but if you just have a bad day or you just don't have your best performance, it can really not reflect your knowledge and your understanding of the material in class, and that's why I think it's so stressful. But we're gonna get into this later, but it's just something that you have to keep doing and get better at. And we have a bunch of tips, but Kabir, do you just want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
for me, a test is really just a response to a challenge by your teacher. I know that might sound like an unorthodox definition, but for me, when I have to approach a test, I'm really just seeing it as an opportunity for the teacher to get to know my understanding of the content, right? Like as Ethan said, you've spent this entire unit learning about stuff, but the teacher really doesn't get a chance to see how well you've absorbed that until you get to take the assessment. So really it's just a chance for a student to both demonstrate that they've been absorbing information and also to, show that off to the teacher. So really it's just, as I said, a response to that challenge.
Yeah, for me, a test is a assignment where a student doesn't have any external resources that's
Mm.
created based on the student's knowledge base. And that's what makes a test so stressful, right? When you're taking a test, you can't take it home. You may have a time constraint. You may know the material, but there might be 10 questions, but you feel like you only have time to answer seven or eight, which can also add to stress. So I think any time where resources, whether it be time, who you can ask, where that's limited, and you have to rely on your knowledge and your ability, that's a test, and that can be very, very stressful for many students. So, you know, I kind of want to get into how our test taking experience has changed for us over high school because we're all seniors now. We went through high school. I'm sure the way we think about tests, the way we think about grades, and our mindset and the way we approach them is vastly different now. So, do any of you want to start and kind of say how has your mindset changed over high school when it comes to tests?
Yeah, so I can kind of just say that I feel like elementary school, middle school, like tests weren't that big of a deal, right? But once you get to high school, it's kind of the real deal. And I remember freshman year in my algebra 2 class, it was my first high school math class, and I came into high school thinking freshman year that's gonna be the hardest class, algebra 2 honors. And I remember there were times when I would get so nervous and so just freaked out that I couldn't do a problem, and my palms would get really sweaty. I wouldn't be able to focus, and I would end up leaving like a third of the test blank. And I remember like I had to meet with my teacher and explain all of that. And I had really, really bad test anxiety freshman year, but I feel like over the years, as I've taken more and more tests, I've learned a few things that I'm going to share later. But that's kind of a good portrayal of how I felt when I first came to high school and kind of how I feel now. But Kabir, do you
For
want
me,
to?
like when I first came to high school, I think the anxiety of being in a new environment kind of just coincided with like an an anxious approach to test taking. Like I remember some of my first classes, I would stress out um immensely over just even small assignments or quizzes like that. And really, I think that was just a combination of being in this new moving on from middle school where, yeah, as Ethan said, most of it didn't even matter. But in high school, right, the stress of college, even as a freshman, you can kind of sense that, college is coming up. And so I had an acute understanding of that process, even, being a freshman. And so that kind of just influenced how I would approach like social studies. Like, for example, in my history class, I had, maybe there were unit tests, right? But I would just spend so many hours trying to go over the content for this because I was so afraid that even one question missed would mean, subpar performance. But over time, of course, I think, things have been put into perspective in a really great way for me. Over the course of taking many classes, I've just come to understand that, each test is only a small part of your journey as a high schooler, right? And over time, you tend to see each test as a smaller bit of that experience. So that's kind of helped me to deal with test taking.
Yeah, so for me, I think there's been probably the biggest change I've had in terms of mindset is the mindset towards test taking, how I approach tests before them, after them, and while I'm actually taking them. And we'll get into strategies later that can hopefully help some of you out, maybe not all of you, but hopefully some of you find some some use out of our tips. But yeah, for me, test taking, my mindset has completely changed. And for me, it's how I deal with the moment of like pure panic during a test when I feel stuck. I don't feel like it's going well. And I start having these thoughts about like I'm predicting bad percentages. How will this affect my grade? How will this affect my, you know, course placement? How will this affect things that are much bigger than the test itself? How will this affect my life? I start having these like very, very substantial panic attacks during tests. And I had that. And it's funny you bring up algebra too. I had that a lot during freshman year during that class because sometimes it's a rude awakening when it's something so objective like math. You either know it or you don't, and you just can't figure it out. It's so painful and panic inducing. And a lot of times during tests, you said like your palms get sweaty, like blood would rush to my face, like I couldn't think straight, and it would just
Yeah.
spiral and get worse and worse. And I can totally relate to that, as I'm sure many of you can as well. Um, and for me, my the way I approach tests and not being able to do problems on tests is much different than you do on homework or worksheets. Because when I see a problem that I can't do in a math worksheet or homework where there's no I guess is the economics term, but like scarcity of resources, time,
Yeah.
outside knowledge, I get excited because I can improve, I can learn about something but when it's on a test, I got very anxious. So for me, over the years, I've gotten better in dealing with that kind of, you know, uh-oh moment, like something's not going well. How do I manage the panic? How do I manage the panic attack? And how do I move forward? And I'm sure many of you parents listening, your kids who are entering high school will experience this in some way, shape, or form. And parents with kids in high school, I'm sure you've had experience with this as well. But in this next kind of segment of the episode, I want to talk about either specific instances that have made you learn about tests or what are some strategies you've used to improve. Anybody, Ethan, Kabir, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I have a few written down. I think, not everyone, it different strategies work for different people. So I'm just gonna name like a few and then, if you think it would be helpful, if you're a parent, you can tell your kid, or if you're a kid listening, you can try applying these. But one is a mindset shift. So you need to know that in your educational career, right? If you want to have a certain job, you're gonna need to take tests, right? And the sooner you realize that in order to get my dream job or whatever profession you want, tests are just something you have to do. So the sooner you stop dreading them and kind of view it like I think Kabir said, like a challenge, right? That's less of a negative word. I feel like challenge that you can overcome, right? And just knowing that they're never going to go away, so you might as well just start learning how to attack them better. So that's the first one I have, just a quick mindset shift. And then another one is, um, it seems kind of basic, but I kind of want to go into the specifics. Usually, teachers kind of tell students to breathe, take a deep breath before a test, but something that is proven by neuroscience and physiology is that when you breathe in fast, so like let's say 3, 4 seconds, and then breathe out slow for like 7, 8 seconds, it's literally like putting a brake on your heartbeat, and it slows your heart rate down, and it kind of makes you more calm so you can get into the right mind. And that way you can, pull different information out of your brain more effectively. And Ben and I were talking about those algebra 2 moments where you're just staring at just a blank problem. By calming yourself down, you can actually pull that information from your brain. So those are two. I'll get to the other ones later, but do one of you guys just want to go ahead and give a
Yeah,
few?
for me, I think one of the biggest strategies I've come to employ over the course of these past 4 years in high school is simulating different like conditions or scenarios for tests. Like for me, like on the day of a test, there's so many factors that go into your performance, right? Like, your mood on that day, the previous events, like did you have a bad day, or like did you have a bad experience in your previous classes? Like if I'm taking a math test, so many things prior in the day or even before that may have, contributed to my performance. So I think one way to kind of balance all those factors, balance all the various conditions that can go into your success during a test, is to, simulate different conditions. And what I mean by that is like taking a test at different times of the day, like practice tests at different times of the day in different locations, maybe with like varying amounts of like resources. Like you can only use a certain type of, material or like a computer or stuff like that. Just small things like that really have helped me kind of get used to how variable testing environments can be. Like for example, when I was taking AP tests last year, the environment sometimes, sometimes you get to charge your computer, sometimes it may not be as easy. So like there's so many things that can influence how successful your test performance is. And just getting the opportunity to practice in various different conditions has just really, helped me become comfortable with those different scenarios.
Yeah, and it sounds almost, I mean, not as like an insult to you, but it sounds almost crazy to like hyper fixate on like these little details. But for some people, it can be very, very important, right? Now, whether or not you're testing like on yellow paper or white paper, it probably doesn't have an effect, but it does if you believe it has an effect. Whatever makes you feel more comfortable during the testing environment, whatever makes you feel like you're prepared and it can have confidence going into a test does help. It's like a placebo effect almost, because the amount of confidence you have going into the test and and the amount of clarity of thought you can have just when the test is passed out. Now, a lot of people can relate to while the test is being passed out, your heart rate is, so elevated. You're like like blood's rushing to your brain. It's sometimes hard to think, right? And the amount that you can minimize that at the start of a test by preparing and increasing your confidence is very important. So whatever little details, whether it's testing in different environments, whatever allows you to feel like you're prepared will help. And I just want to mention one more thing. A lot of people prepare, but they do it by half measure almost because they're on their phone or
Yeah.
or they're um or they're distracted by the TV.
Mhm.
Like if you're going to spend the time to prepare, use it to prepare and build your confidence. Like it's so clear how directly proportional your um success will be on a test to how you prepare. If you can sit down and force yourself to do problems that are similar to what you'll see on the test for a while without looking at your phone, you are going to be prepared. And I'm not saying that, sitting down and doing these problems is going to cause you to solve them better, but it's going to increase your confidence. It's a mental game because you
Yeah.
may know the knowledge, but if you don't have the confidence going into the test, it's hard to deal with those uh-oh moments.
Uh, yeah, and I kind of want to quickly add on, as we were talking about breathing, I actually remember I'm in AP Psych right now, and something that we learned that my psych teacher told us is that there's a nervous system. Part of your nervous system is called the sympathetic nervous system, which is like your fight or flight kind of nervous system. It kind of raises your heartbeat, pushes the adrenaline through your body, and that's just natural to have that activated before a test. But by breathing and doing that slow breathing, there's something called the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's kind of like a parachute, right? It starts with para. That's how what my psych teacher told us. And it kind of slows down your heart rate and kind of activates this slow, calm part of your nervous system. So that's just some signs for you. But another tip that I have is Ben was talking about preparing and being in the right environment. Like you don't want to study with a phone and Googling all these things up. You want to make an environment as close to the test environment. But in terms of preparation, what I like to do, how I like to break down my studying is two things, two really key principles. One is active recall. So like Ben, Kabir, have you guys ever heard of like active recall?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
So
heard of it, but
I
yeah.
think a lot of people um kind of know how it is, but like in practice it's kind of different. I think active recall is simply just staring at a piece of paper or problem that you don't know how to do and working backwards. You know how a lot of people like to skim over their notes, make sure they know everything, sometimes don't even practice and just go in think it'll work. That's actually not as helpful by working backwards, starting with maybe looking at a blank sheet of paper and try to rewrite all your notes from memory, or look at a problem and try to do it and grind through like the not knowing and the uncomfortable like feelings in your brain, whatever. I know that's not a great description, but like working through that struggle and then you can fill in gaps by looking at notes. Doing that system is way helpful because that's how the test is going to be. You're not going to have notes and then take the test or during the test. So that's first part of my studying system. Second one is this idea that people say procrastination is bad, but I think yes, it's bad, but the real reason is because for information to kind of sink in and for you to fully understand the material, cramming it the night before, even though you might have just reviewed it all and you're like, okay, I know everything, it's not actually like in your brain. If you take a little bit of time, this is what I like to do, a little bit, maybe just like 20 minutes every single day and study the material, it gradually begins to sink in and solidify itself in your brain. So I think 20 minutes 2 weeks before the test is better than 5 hours the night before. So start early, a little bit every day, and active recall. Those are my like two parts of my system.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
go ahead, Kabir.
there's something like I really like the idea of active recall and just like, writing things down from memory onto a blank piece of paper, right? Because it really just forces the brain to overcome one of the key challenges of studying, right? Which is, like using your memory and applying it to a specific situation. But something I have, one tip I have along those lines is teaching to other people. So like, if you're studying a very difficult concept, it's very easy to get lost in textbook explanations, right? And maybe you've even committed some of those explanations to memory, like very specific phrases. But the problem is, although it might seem like you're studying when you're doing that, you're not actually using your brain to like critically think about it. So what I like to do is explain the content to someone who may not be as well versed in it. Like, for example, if I have a friend who's taking a completely different set of classes, but I have a very difficult concept in my class that I have to explain, I'll just go up and try to, communicate that information in the simplest way possible, using the simplest possible words. And the reason you want to use the simplest language is because not only are you going to help that person to get a better understanding of what you're doing, and like you can check in with them to make sure they understood, but also that explanation, since you have put in the critical thinking effort of coming up with that explanation on the spot, that is going to stick with you up until the day of the test. I'm telling you, if you can come up with a very succinct and concise explanation of a concept, that truly means you understand it. And if you understand it, you're going to be able to apply it. So just being able to, use your mental resources to come up with, good concise explanations rather than like regurgitating textbook explanations. That is something I have found is extremely
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah, is that I
Wait,
think it's called a Feynman
yeah,
technique.
that's what I was gonna say. I think
Yeah.
if you're curious, you can search up. Wait, how do you pronounce it, Ben?
Feynman.
Yeah,
I
it's
think it,
spelled Feynman. This is
yes.
actually like a proven study tip
Mhm.
that Kabir just said perfectly. It's basically taking these complex things, putting it into simple words, and that's how it's going to be in your brain, how you can apply
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and Ethan, I love how you talk about being uncomfortable. And
Yeah,
that's like something that people, I feel like it seems like such a simple idea. You want to be uncomfortable to prepare because a test, it's uncomfortable when you're taking a test and you don't know what you're doing and you're like worrying about all the negative consequences that are going to come after it.
yeah,
So a lot of people, they view their phone as a crutch during studying because they can't focus and they don't know how to do the problems. I'll go on my phone and they come back. But I think a lot of people, and this kind of leads into what I'll talk later, but your brain works subconsciously all the time. So when you're on your phone, your brain is actually thinking a little bit about the test, so it becomes easier. The phone, it becomes a crutch while you're studying for a test. So that's just one example of how people make it less uncomfortable.
yeah,
But I'll give an analogy, right? If you're a football player or on a football team, your team's going to do better if you practice in full pads more often, as opposed to just doing like kind of a walkthrough or right of plays.
yeah,
If you're a baseball player, you're going to hit better if you're doing live BP more often, live batting practice more often, as opposed to just hitting off a tee all the time, because that simulates a real game situation, right?
mhm,
So you've mentioned procrastination. A lot of people try and procrastinate that discomfort to the time of the test because it's uncomfortable. You don't want to experience it when you're studying. But if you can handle that while you're studying and really embrace how the discomfort of not knowing and accepting that there is work to do, you're not going to feel that as much when you take the test. So it's really procrastinating that feeling of discomfort. It's going to happen at some point. You would much rather have it
yeah.
happen before the test, maybe in your room when you're studying, and not on a test when it actually matters.
Yeah, and something that I've experienced in the past that I think is pretty relevant to what you just said, Ben, is the idea of like getting too comfortable, right? When you're on your phone, using that as a crutch during studying, right? Like you might see a difficult problem, Google like the answer on your phone, and then be like, oh, reading the explanation, you'll be like, oh, I would have thought of that. Like if I had a little bit more time, I definitely would have, come to that eventually. This seems like common sense. Like eventually, if you use your phone too much in that way, it becomes kind of a dangerous effect because it makes you think that, you can just, oh, it's common sense. Like obviously that's how the problem is solved, right? Obviously, I would have gotten that if I just didn't use my phone. But in reality, you're misleading yourself into thinking that you could have solved it without your phone. And you're not
Yeah.
actually putting in the effort to be able to do that in a situation without resources. So I think that's one of the additional dangers of the phone. It's not just that you're using it as a crutch during your studying sessions, but you're also kind of rewiring your brain's approach to the test itself by making it think that it can just see these concepts as common sense when in reality, even if it is if it's a difficult test, like, and you convince yourself of that, it can be particularly dangerous, because you get into that mindset, and on the day of the test, oh, it suddenly stops becoming common sense because you relied so much on other resources.
Yeah, I think it also in AP Psych. Have you guys ever heard of hindsight bias?
Uh,
Yeah.
So it's
Yes.
this idea like where you look in the past and you're like, oh, I would have done like a sports game. Like, oh, why did the coach make this play? Like, it's so obvious. Like, you should
Yeah,
have done
we
this.
watch like when you watch
Yeah,
a football game and you say, why did the quarterback make that decision?
yeah,
I would
that's
never. Yeah.
exactly. So, Kabir, I think you're perfectly describing hindsight bias. It's like if you look at your phone, you're like, oh yeah, I would have gotten that. Yeah, this is what the right answer is, right? And you're training yourself to think that way. Then on the test, right, you're screwed because of all that. What's called is hindsight bias. So yeah, that's just another psych term. But Ben,
Yeah.
I think do you want to
Yeah, and
go?
it is important
Yeah,
to
yeah,
discuss the science behind it because
yeah.
it's not like we're making these things up. You hear these cliches all the time, but we try and get into it a little bit more. But there's real science behind this,
Hmm.
and a lot of going back to the sort of discomfort thing. I think that's really what fuels a lot of people not studying and not preparing in the correct way. It's very uncomfortable to study when you feel like you're not where in a place that you need to be and a test is coming up. So people push it off and trying, as they say, cope or say that they have it under control. It's all good, and when the test comes, it's not. And so I think that, and another thing I'll mention is people try and it's all about avoiding discomfort in an unhealthy way. People will often say to their friends, like you hear it all the time, like, "Oh, it's so over for me. I'm so cooked," or whatever they say. And a lot of times that's just trying to get validation from others that they don't have to be this uncomfortable because everybody else is experiencing this, so it's all fine. So I think that trying to change that mentality and accepting, look, test, I'm gonna have to take it. Like it's there, it's not going away. I can't complain and get out of it. Like it's going to happen. So I think the best success coming is a combination of recognizing the difficult task ahead of you. It is a difficult task, but you have to maintain confidence and not go and try and convince other people that it's fine. You don't have to be stressed because everybody's just gonna fail anyway. That's not healthy, and trying to avoid discomfort in studying is not healthy either.
Hmm. Um, guys, I kind of went through all my tips. You guys have
Yeah,
any?
I have one more actually. So, I think that another thing that people don't do, and keeps on going back to the theme of avoiding discomfort, right?
Yeah.
Is they don't want to think about the test. They try and block it out of their mind. People don't want to think about the test. They will try and block it out of their mind before they take it. They don't want to think about the room the test is in. They don't want to think about, what's going to be on it. They don't want to think about the teacher. And that's kind of avoiding the uncomfortable again. For me, a strategy that's really, really worked is visualizing the test, visualizing the room I'm going to be in, visualizing the stress. You recognize you're going to feel stress, visualizing the stress that I'm going to feel. Maybe visualizing a difficult problem that could be on the test and you working through it in a productive way. Maybe if you're like Kabir, want to focus on more specific details. What are you wearing? Like, where are you sitting in the room? All of these little things can help make the experience much, much better. And I can say each time that I visualize what I'm going to do on a test and kind of combine that with doing practice problems, right? It becomes very rhythmic. Much less, it becomes much less of a rude awakening when the test is passed out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, that kind of ties into the idea of like conditioning yourself for that environment. And I really love the idea of visualization. Like that is, I've used that in the past. I think it's a very valuable tool because obviously, your natural instinct, if you're worried, is to try to block out the negative thing, right? But kind of embracing that, I think a big theme we've been talking about is the idea of embracing the stress of the event, the stress of the test, instead of just blocking it out. And I was talking about it earlier, right? But visualizing, or I mean, conditioning yourself in different environments to simulate the pressure, to simulate the stress, that's all part of embracing the stress of the event. And another thing I think you talked about really well is the cope aspect of it. A lot of people love to cope by just seeking validation, but if you're going to take a test, you might as well put your best effort into it instead of running away with these like half-baked excuses, like or just seeking that kind of validation from other people. So I think that's a very powerful point, and it just goes to show that like the idea of embracing the stress is kind of one of the biggest tools you can use to overcome a big challenge like an exam.
Hmm. Yeah, so honestly, guys, I think we covered a lot, but I think a good way to end this would probably just like give one final closing thought. So I'll go first, okay? So a good thing or a helpful thing that I saw on Instagram, I know we don't like talking about social. I mean, we do like talking about social media, but we don't think it's good to use it, but whatever. You can listen to a different episode on that. But basically, I saw this tip or this mindset shift where it's like study so much for a test that you're excited for it, right? Like Ben Kabir, has there ever been a moment where you've studied so much, you finally have a handle on this hard material and you're on the test and you're like, let's go, I know how to do this, right? Like
Yeah.
that feels good, right?
Never before a test. Sometimes when I'm halfway through the test, I'm like, all right, We got it. And that's
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
best feeling. That's the best
Exactly.
feeling. Like that's worth all the discomfort of studying. Like when you are on a test and like you just feel it. Like it's such a good feeling. So that's I guess motivation. I know probably most of you have like felt that at some point. Like you want to strive for that because that really compounds over time.
Exactly. So yeah, that's just my one tip. Study until you're excited for the test. What about you guys?
Yeah. For me, the night before a test, right? Like, sometimes I feel like demotivated, right? And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much stuff to review. Like, how am I gonna even do this before tomorrow? Right. But then I realized, like, if I don't do well, that's gonna haunt me for hours or even days after the test. Like I know that sounds extreme, but like generally, like I have such a difficult time forgetting about when I've done something wrong, right? So I think the fear of that, like the fear of, not having tried my best, like the next day I'll be like, oh, why didn't I do all that I could have in order to succeed? The fear of regretting that, right? That kind of motivates me to do as much as I can to prevent the some poor performance from happening. And if it does happen, so be it. I mean, at least you tried at that point, right? You can't. There's nothing to regret if you've actually done your best. But I think the regret is what gets me every time. So that's what kind of motivates me to do stuff beforehand.
Yeah, and I'll give kind of a final tip, and this may only work for me, and I'll take all of these points right with a grain of salt because this is what works for us, and obviously, we've all had some academic success, right, with tests, and we've all improved. Not like we were just naturally so good at it, but we've improved. So you take all these with a grain of salt. But one that works for me is when you're taking a test and you feel that uh-oh moment that we've talked about. You're stuck on a problem. You have to not be a perfectionist. You have to be able to move on. Now, I wrote this down because it made me remind that Einstein's definition of insanity is trying something over and over again and expecting different results. And that applies when you're stuck on a problem in a test and you keep on trying the same thing over and over again. And I don't know the exact psych term because I'm not, an expert on it like Ethan, but um, when you move on from one question to another, you're bouncing around like different questions. Your brain is still subconsciously processing and working on the information you've already taken in. So if you're stuck on question number three, and you go to question number seven because that's when you feel like you can do it and that'll get you in a rhythm, your brain's still subconsciously processing what it saw on question number three. So in that way, it's like pure science. You're just optimizing the amount of time you spend thinking and you're optimizing your results as well. So don't be a perfectionist. You can move on, bounce around between different questions, and a lot of times I've found it all works out in the end.
Mhm. All right, very well said, Ben. I think this is all the time we have for today. We're really trying to keep these episodes pretty compact. But coming up, right, we have a lot of fun stuff. Ben, don't we have another one scheduled next week, I think, right?
Yeah, we have a lot of episodes coming up with a lot
Yeah.
of interesting guests. We're gonna probably have some actual. Now I know we're actual high school students,
Oh,
but we'll
yeah.
also have some other actual high school students on the podcast to talk about their experiences. We're gonna have more mental health professionals coming on to make their, valuable insights available to everybody.
Mhm.
And obviously with every episode, we hope you can relate to some of our experiences and hopefully gain some helpful insight.
Yep. All right. Well, that's it for today. My name's Ethan.
I'm Ben.
I'm Kabir.
And just remember, your mind matters.